They said her blood was sacred, untouchable, that letting her die was the natural order of their twisted galactic politics. But they forgot one crucial detail. To a combat medic from Earth, there are no gods, no royal decrees, and no lost causes. There is only the patient. The United Nations medical frigate Nightingale hung in the silent expanse of the neutral sector, a solitary beacon of white and red against the cold void of deep space. Inside the sterile confines of the medbay, Dr. Thomas Avery was nursing a cup of lukewarm synthetic coffee. Thomas was a veteran of the Sirius campaigns, a trauma surgeon who had earned his stripes at the Halifax Trauma Center back on Earth before taking his skills to the stars. He was a man who traded in heartbeats and oxygen sats, not galactic politics. The uneasy peace between the United Nations of Earth and the sovereign ascendancy was holding by a thread. The ascendancy was a vast, sprawling empire of genetically perfected humanoids. Thanks to the universal translator implants pioneered by neural tech firms like Neuralink and standard issue for all deep space personnel, the ascendancy's complex, clicking language was rendered into flawless English, and their unpronounceable aristocratic titles were localized into familiar Western equivalents. To the Empire, humans were mud dwellers, loud, fragile, and unrefined. To humans, the ascendancy was a gilded cage, a society paralyzed by caste systems, divine right, and archaic traditions. The console on Thomas's desk flared to life, breaking the monotonous hum of the ship's life support. It wasn't a standard distress beacon. It was an encrypted tight-beam transmission, squawking on an archaic analog frequency that bypassed the Nightingale's military filters and went straight to the medical emergency channel. Thomas tapped the console. "Comms, what am I looking at?" "I don't know, Doc," replied Specialist Gregory Finch over the intercom. "It's bouncing off a dozen relay satellites, masking its origin. But the encryption signature, its ascendancy. High level. Royal good." Thomas frowned, setting his coffee down. "Put it through." A voice crackled through the speakers. It was weak, ragged, and female. Every breath sounded like it was being drawn through broken glass. "To any who can hear this is Empress Catherine of the Sovereign Ascendancy. My royal physicians, they watch me fade. They call it the will of the void. It is no divine will. It is poison. Lord Regent William, he seeks the throne. Please, I do not wish to die in the dark." The recording looped, the desperate whisper echoing in the quiet amidver. Captain Richard Hayes stormed into the room moments later, his face pale. "You heard it, Avery. We are purging the logs. Now!" "Purging the logs?" Thomas stood up, his chair scraping against the deck. "Captain, that is a distress call from the sovereign ruler of a neighboring empire. She's being assassinated." "Exactly," Hayes snapped, pointing a stern finger at the doctor. "It's an internal coup. If we intervene, the ascendancy will view it as an act of war. Lord Regent William commands their first fleet. We are a hospital ship, Thomas. We have 2 defensive railguns and a hull made of recycled titanium. We do not get involved in alien succession wars." "She's a patient, Richard," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. "Since when do we check a geopolitical ledger before applying a tourniquet? Since the patient is an empress who is technically an enemy of state." "The Hippocratic Oath doesn't have a jurisdictional limit, Captain," Thomas countered, reaching into his locker and pulling out his reinforced field medic armor. He grabbed his trauma kit, a heavy, scuffed crate stamped with the faded logos of Medtronic and the Red Cross. Under the Geneva Accords, Article 4, medical personnel are obligated to respond to verified life-threatening emergencies if they possess the means to do so. I'm taking the stalk. Hayes blocked the door. I will have you court-martialed, Avery. You can try, Thomas said, his eyes hard. But if you stop me, and the Empress Astros dies, you'll be the man who let the ascendancy fall to a warmongering dictator because you were afraid of some paperwork. Get out of my way. Hayes glared at him for a long, tense moment. The captain knew Thomas's record. He knew the man had once held a collapsed artery, together with his bare hands, for 3 hours during the siege of New Dresden. Finally, Hayes stepped aside. You have no official sanction, Hayes muttered. If you are caught, you are a rogue actor. Earth will disavow you. Standard operating procedure, then, Thomas replied, already moving down the corridor. He tapped his comms link. Abigail, prep the drop shuttle. We're making a house call. Nurse Abigail Mitchell was waiting in the hangar bay. She was a former combat medic from the orbital drop shock divisions, a woman who carried a customized Lockheed Martin pulse rifle slung over her shoulder, right next to her defibrillator. Destination, Doc? Abigail asked, chewing on a piece of synthetic gum. The Ascendancy flagship, the Grandeur, Thomas said, strapping himself into the co-pilot seat of the small, heavily shielded shuttle. We're going to crash a royal funeral. The Grandeur was a terrifying marvel of engineering. It hung in the darkness of space like a gilded leviathan, a dreadnought spanning 5 miles from bow to stern, bristling with plasma batteries and energy shielding. They have enough firepower to turn a moon into glass, David Lewis, the shuttle's pilot, whispered as he navigated the stalk through the dense asteroid field bordering the neutral zone. I'm engaging the Kessler-Braun cloaking tech, but if they run a deep thermal scan, we're cooked. Just get us to the Royal Hangar, Thomas said, checking the auto-injectors in his kit for the 4th time. The Empress said her own guards are compromised. We can expect heavy resistance. Actually, Doc, David said, his hands flying across the control yoke. The thermal imaging of the Royal Wing is cold. Too cold. The hangar bay is completely unguarded. It's a trap, Abigail said, racking the bolt of her pulse rifle. Or an execution, Thomas grimaced. Take us in. Hard and fast. The small shuttle slipped through the dreadnought's magnetic shielding, landing with a heavy thud on the pristine, marble-like decking of the royal hangar. The ramp dropped, and Thomas and Abigail sprinted out, boots clattering against the polished floor. The silence inside the ship was oppressive. The Ascendancy prided itself on elegance. The walls were lined with intricate gold filigree, and soft bioluminescent lighting pulsed like a slow heartbeat. But as they breached the corridor leading to the imperial quarters, the beauty of the ship was marred by the gruesome reality of a coup. 6 Praetorian guards, towering figures in ceremonial armor, lay dead on the floor. There were no plasma burns, no signs of a struggle. Abigail knelt beside one of the bodies, scanning it with a handheld biometric reader. No trauma. Heart stopped. The toxicology readout is screaming. Looks like a heavy metal neurotoxin. Delivered via the air vents, maybe. Lord Regent William wanted this to look clean, Thomas deduced, stepping over a fallen guard. A natural passing for the Empress, and an unfortunate accident for her loyalists. Let's move. They reached the massive, vaulted doors of the Empress's bedchamber. The doors were locked down, sealed by biometric heavy locks. Stand back, Abigail ordered. She retrieved a specialized breaching charge, manufactured by the private defense contractor, Halliburton Aerospace, and slapped it against the control panel. A blinding flash and a muffled thump later The heavy doors hissed and slid apart. Thomas rushed into the room, his medical instincts instantly taking over. The chamber was massive, smelling heavily of incense and metallic ozone. At the center of the room, on an elevated dais, lay Empress Catherine. She was a striking figure, nearly 7 feet tall, with pale, iridescent skin and silver hair. But her skin was heavily mottled with dark, necrotic purple bruising. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving in erratic, shallow bursts. Surrounding her bed were 4 ascendancy figures dressed in flowing crimson robes. They were not treating her. They were holding ornate censers, chanting in low, rhythmic tones. Thomas didn't hesitate. He stormed up the dais, shoving a shocked alien priest out of the way. "What is the meaning of this profane intrusion?" shouted the lead priest, a man the translator identified as High Physician Albert. "Mud dwellers, you dare interrupt the grace of the void. The Empress is transcending." "She's not transcending, Albert. She's suffocating," Thomas barked, dropping his heavy trauma kit onto the pristine silk sheets of the royal bed. He grabbed a penlight and flashed it into the Empress's eyes. Her pupils were blown wide, unresponsive. Her pulse was a thready, terrifying flutter. "Seize them!" Albert screamed. "The Lord Regent commands it." Before the other 3 priests could draw the ceremonial blades hidden beneath their robes, Abigail stepped forward, her pulse rifle raised and glowing with lethal intent. "The next one who speaks gets a hole where their chest used to be," Abigail said, her voice deadpan and terrifyingly calm. "Take a step back and let the doctor work." The priests froze, their eyes darting between the human weapon and their dying ruler. Thomas ignored the standoff. He hooked a diagnostic scanner to the Empress's wrist. The ascendancy biology was slightly different from human. Copper-based blood, a redundant pulmonary system, but cellular respiration was a universal constant, and right now, hers was failing. "Scanner shows massive coagulation in the secondary arteries," Thomas muttered to himself, his hands moving with practiced lightning speed. "Her kidneys are shutting down. The poison is a thallium-based analog. It's binding to her oxygen receptors. They're drowning her in her own blood." "Can you fix it?" Abigail asked, keeping her sights locked on the priests. "Not with their mystical incense, I can't," Thomas growled. He pulled a massive 14-gauge needle from his kit, attached to a line of clear tubing. "Ascendancy skin is dense, microweaved. Normal needles bend." He grabbed a bone-saw scalpel. "Sorry, Your Majesty. This isn't going to be pretty." Thomas made a precise, aggressive incision directly into the Empress's jugular vein. Physician Albert gasped in sheer horror, dropping his censer. "Blasphemy! You are mutilating the royal vessel. Her blood is sacred." "Her blood is toxic, you fanatic," Thomas snapped. He jammed the 14-gauge catheter into the incision, locking it in place. He hooked the other end to a portable dialysis centrifuge he pulled from the crate. "Abigail, I need 2 milligrams of synthesized epinephrine, and prep the chelation binders. We need to scrub this heavy metal out of her system before it hits her brainstem." The centrifuge hummed to life, pulling the thick, purplish-blue blood from the Empress, spinning it rapidly to separate the toxins, and pumping it back in. It was a brutal, ugly, and inherently human piece of medical engineering. To the Ascendancy, medicine was about balancing energies and peaceful transitions. To humanity, medicine was a war against death, fought with chemicals, electricity, and raw stubbornness. Suddenly, Empress Catherine arched her back, a wet, rattling gasp escaping her lips as the epinephrine hit her system. Her eyes fluttered open, locking onto Thomas. "Stay with me, Catherine," Thomas ordered, his voice commanding and steady. "Do not close your eyes. You called for a medic. You got one." Before she could speak, the comms link in Thomas's ear crackled wildly. "Doc! Abigail! We have a massive problem!" David yelled from the shuttle. A whole battalion of the Regent's actual death squads just entered the sector. They bypassed the hangar. They are cutting through the bulkheads. You have maybe 3 minutes before they breach that room. Thomas looked at the centrifuge. The blood returning to the Empress was still dangerously dark. The poison was fighting back. He needed at least 10 minutes to stabilize her enough to move. Abigail checked the power cell on her rifle and stepped toward the heavy, blasted doors of the bedchamber, taking cover behind a shattered marble pillar. 3 minutes? Abigail smiled, a grim, terrifying expression. "Doc, you just keep her breathing. I'll buy you 10. The heavy metallic thud of magnetic boots echoed through the vaulted hallway outside the Empress's chamber. It wasn't the synchronized, elegant march of the ceremonial guard. It was the brutal, heavy cadence of Ascendancy shock troopers. Lord Regent William had sent his personal hounds, and they were not here to take prisoners. Abigail Mitchell crouched behind the shattered marble pillar, her eyes locked on the tactical feed streaming across her retinal display. "Doc!" she called out over her shoulder, her voice cool and detached. "I count 12 hostiles, heavy assault armor. They're carrying particle beam rifles. Give me some good news." "She's stabilizing, but her systolic pressure is in the basement," Thomas shouted over the whining hum of the centrifuge. He was elbow-deep in the chaotic mess of alien biology and human medical tech, his gloves stained with dark, purplish blood. "I need 5 more minutes to flush the neurotoxin from her cerebral cortex, or she wakes up brain-dead." 5 minutes, Abigail repeated. "Copy that." She reached into her webbing and pulled out 3 spherical devices. Raytheon-designed concussive flashbangs, engineered for zero-G and high-gravity combat environments alike. She primed the first one just as the vanguard of the shock troopers stacked up against the breached doorway. "Mud dwellers!" bellowed the squad leader, Commander Cole, his voice amplified by his helmet's external speakers. "Lay down your crude weapons and submit to the Regent's justice." "I don't think so, Cole," Abigail whispered. She lobbed the grenade. It bounced twice, slipping right between the heavily armored legs of the lead trooper. The Ascendancy relied heavily on personal kinetic barriers, shields designed to deflect high-velocity energy weapons. They were not designed to dampen the primitive, overwhelming shockwave of a human concussive explosive. The grenade detonated with a deafening crack that shook the marble floor. The overpressure wave shattered the ornate stained glass windows lining the corridor and sent the first 3 troopers flying backward like ragdolls, their internal gyros completely scrambled. Abigail didn't wait for the smoke to clear. She leaned out of cover, shouldered her pulse rifle, and fired 3 controlled bursts. The high-density armor-piercing rounds chewed through the disrupted energy shields of the disoriented troopers, finding the weak points at their neck and shoulder joints. 3 bodies hit the floor, heavy and lifeless. "Suppressing fire!" Cole roared, scrambling over the bodies of his fallen men. A barrage of searing blue particle beams flooded the room, vaporizing chunks of the marble pillar Abigail was using for cover. The heat was instantaneous and suffocating, ozone burning her nostrils. She ducked low, drawing a heavy, tungsten-barreled Sig Sauer sidearm from her thigh holster, a reliable relic from a bygone era that ignored electronic countermeasures entirely. Meanwhile, at the center of the room, Thomas was fighting a war of his own. The portable dialysis machine was flashing an angry crimson. The filter cartridge was clogging with the thick, sludgy heavy metals he was pulling from Empress Catherine's veins. "Damn it!" Thomas hissed. He reached into his trauma kit, bypassing the automated systems, and manually injected a massive dose of synthetic heparin directly into the main line to thin her blood. High Physician Albert, recovering from his shock, lunged forward. "You are killing her! You defile the vessel! Let her pass into the void!" Albert grabbed Thomas's shoulder, trying to pull him away from the bed. It was a fatal miscalculation. Thomas didn't even look at the alien priest. He simply pivoted, dropped his center of gravity, and drove a vicious, textbook elbow directly into Albert's solar plexus. The High Physician crumpled to the floor, gasping for breath, clutching his ribs in agony. "Do not touch my patient," Thomas snarled, turning back to the monitors. "And stop talking about the void. She's not going anywhere today." On the bed, Empress Catherine's chest heaved. The terrifying, necrotic purple bruising on her skin was slowly beginning to recede, replaced by the faint, iridescent glow of her natural complexion. Her eyes opened, no longer blown and vacant, but sharp, lucid, and filled with pain. She looked at the tubes jutting from her neck, the whirring, blood-splattered centrifuge, and then up at the sweating, disheveled human standing over her. "You," Catherine rasped, her voice dry and brittle. "A human? Why?" "Because you called for a doctor, Your Majesty," Thomas said, adjusting the flow rate on the IV. "Try not to speak. Your vocal cords are heavily inflamed from the thallium." "They told me humans were scavengers," she whispered, her eyes tracking the chaotic firefight happening just yards away at the door. "That you were primitive." "We are," Thomas agreed, ripping open a fresh gauze pad and applying pressure to her secondary IV site. "We're stubborn, aggressive, and we don't know when to quit, which is exactly what you need right now. The ascendancy teaches you to accept death gracefully. Humans? We spit in its face and make it fight for every inch." A massive explosion rocked the chamber as Commander Cole fired a shoulder-mounted plasma rocket. The warhead struck the dais, shattering the stone steps and sending a shower of deadly shrapnel through the air. Thomas instinctively threw his heavily armored body over the Empress, shielding her with his own back. A piece of jagged marble tore through the shoulder of his field armor, biting deep into his flesh. Thomas gritted his teeth, suppressing a groan. He glanced down at Catherine. "Are you hit?" "No," she said, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. You bled for me. A mud dweller bled for the crown." "Occupational hazard," Thomas muttered, pushing himself back up and checking the dialysis readout. It was green. The critical threshold had been passed. "Doc!" Abigail yelled, her voice strained. She had retreated to the second line of pillars. Her pulse rifle was smoking, out of ammo. She was dual-wielding her Sig Sauer and a combat knife, bleeding from a grazing plasma burn on her cheek. "I'm dry! They're pushing in!" Commander Cole marched into the room, flanked by 6 remaining shock troopers. Their armor was scorched and dented, but their weapons were raised and locked onto the humans. "It is over," Cole announced, his particle rifle aimed squarely at Abigail's chest. "Step away from the royal corpse. By order of Lord Regent William, you are sentenced to immediate execution." Thomas didn't raise his hands. He calmly reached down to the Empress's neck, pinched the catheter line, and expertly withdrew the 14-gauge needle, pressing a quick, clotting biometric bandage against the wound. "She's not a corpse, Cole," Thomas said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the room. He stepped aside. From the ruined silk sheets of the royal bed, Empress Catherine rose. She was weak, her limbs trembling. But as she stood up to her full 7-foot height, the sheer, overwhelming aura of her genetic lineage flooded the room. To the ascendancy, the royal bloodline was not just a title. They were biologically engineered to command, releasing subtle pheromones and subsonic vocal frequencies that triggered deep, ingrained obedience in their subjects. Commander Cole froze. The particle rifle in his hands suddenly looked very heavy. "Commander," Catherine spoke. Her voice was raspy, scarred by the poison, but it rolled across the room like thunder. "You dare draw weapons in my sanctuary? You dare threaten the hands that brought me back from the dark?" "Majesty," Cole stammered, his military discipline shattering in an instant. The shock troopers behind him immediately dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to the floor in absolute terror. The Lord Regent told us you had passed into the void. We were sent to secure your remains. William sent you to ensure his poison finished its work," Catherine said coldly, stepping down from the shattered dais. She walked toward Cole, her bare feet stepping over the rubble. "He sought to usurp the throne through cowardice, and you, Cole, blindly followed a traitor." "Mercy, Empress," Cole whispered, dropping his rifle and falling to his knees, exposing his neck in the traditional ascendancy gesture of submission. "Arrest Lord Regent William," Catherine commanded, her eyes blazing with an ancient, terrifying fury. "Lock down the grandeur. Any officer who stands with him is to be thrown out the airlock. Go." Cole didn't hesitate. "By your will, Majesty." He scrambled to his feet, gesturing wildly to his men. The shock troopers turned and sprinted out of the room, their mission instantly rewritten by the very god they thought was dead. The chamber fell silent, save for the hum of the human medical equipment and the soft groans of the awakening High Physician Albert on the floor. Thomas swayed slightly, the adrenaline beginning to crash, the pain in his shoulder flaring up. He reached up, feeling the warm blood soaking his undersuit. Abigail holstered her sidearm, casually wiping a smear of soot from her forehead. "Well, Doc, you certainly know how to liven up a Tuesday." Catherine turned back to the two humans. The aristocratic haughtiness that defined her species was gone, replaced by a profound, shaken awe. "You saved my life," Catherine said, looking at Thomas's bleeding shoulder. "You defied an empire, fought my royal guard, and spilled your own blood for a stranger who despises your kind." "I'm a doctor, Catherine," Thomas said, packing his gear back into the Medtronic crate with one good arm. "I don't care about your empire. I don't care about your politics. When a patient says they don't want to die in the dark, I do my job." He snapped the heavy crate shut. "David, bring the stalk around to the main shattered window. We're not walking back through that hallway." "Copy that, Doc. I see the fireworks, hovering outside now." David's voice crackled cheerfully in their ears. The Empress watched them prepare to leave. "Wait. Dr. Thomas Avery, how can the Ascendancy repay this debt? What does Earth want?" Thomas paused, looking over his shoulder at the towering, iridescent ruler of 1,000,000,000,000 souls. "Earth doesn't know I'm here. If you want to repay the debt, call off your border fleets. Stop calling us mud dwellers. And next time you get sick," Thomas smirked, "try aspirin instead of incense." With a hiss of thrusters, the stalk positioned itself outside the blasted window. Abigail grabbed the heavy medical crate, and Thomas followed her up the boarding ramp. They didn't bow. They didn't ask for permission to leave. They simply walked away, leaving the sovereign ruler of the Ascendancy standing in the ruins of her bedchamber, staring after the humans with a newfound, profound respect. 3 hours later, aboard the United Nations frigate Nightingale, Captain Richard Hayes was pacing a hole in the deck plating of the bridge. "You are insane, Avery," Hayes muttered, staring at the fresh bandages on Thomas's shoulder. "We are going to be annihilated. The Ascendancy is going to use this as the ultimate pretext for war." "I doubt it, Richard," Thomas said, taking a sip of fresh synthetic coffee. Before Hayes could scream another reprimand, the main view screen flared to life. The Ascendancy encryption seal appeared, but this time it wasn't an archaic emergency frequency. It was the official, highest-tier diplomatic channel, broadcast openly to every United Nations vessel in the sector. The screen cleared, revealing Empress Catherine. She was seated on the Sun Throne, draped in royal gold, looking every bit the immortal ruler her people believed her to be. "To the United Nations of Earth," Catherine announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "For centuries, we have looked down upon your worlds. We believed our elegance made us superior. But today, a human reached into the jaws of the void and pulled me back. Today, I learned that true strength does not come from royal blood, but from the relentless, defiant will to save life." She paused, looking directly into the camera, as if she could see the tired, bleeding medic holding a coffee cup light years away. "Effective immediately, the Sovereign Ascendancy recognizes the United Nations of Earth as equals. The border fleets are ordered to stand down. Let there be peace between the stars. And let it be known, we owe our empire to a mud dweller." The bridge of the Nightingale erupted into stunned, deafening silence. Hayes turned to Thomas, his jaw practically hitting the floor. "Doc, what the hell did you do over there?" Thomas took a slow, satisfying sip of his coffee. "Just a little outpatient procedure, Captain. Just doing my job." "Did you love seeing humanity show the galaxy what a real combat medic can do? If you enjoyed this HFY story of defiance, medical grit, and human stubbornness, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends to help the channel grow, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another epic sci-fi adventure. What should our human medics tackle next? Let me know in the comments below.